Hola, Piali, Ken Wahambio. Welcome to week 2 of New Mexico Literary Landscapes. Hope you all had a nice week back, and that things have gone pretty smooth. I'm excited to see and hear some of your and read some of your posts. It's been great. I love teaching this class. It's just so awesome and so fun. Um, and so this week we're going to kind of dive into a little bit of ancient thought and storytelling. And so, but before that, I want to talk a little bit more about locuras from Levi Romero. Um, because it's just a kind of a perfect example and lead way into like the conversation we're having this week with connection to the Antepasados and stuff like that. Um, and so one thing that to me that's always awesome is the fact that um we get to have uh this experience pretty much. If you're in Nuevo Mexicano, a lot of this stuff is pretty common for us. And so when outsiders or people from outside of New Mexico, or even the Southwest, um, hear about this stuff, it's always something different, right? And so it's something big, something like way different than they're used to experiencing. And so with that said, like sometimes we tend to take that for granted, right? So like when we see a lowrider or someone like something like that, um, or even experience lowrider culture, um, we're just kind of like, oh, that's the norm here, right? Um, but in reality, there's so much more to it. Because we tend to, like I said, just take it for granted, where other people around the world are like, whoa, what is this? Where we see like Chicano culture in Japan, right? And like how they've embraced lowrider culture as a part of that. And so you see all these uh people from Japan dressed up in their little chorito and chorita outfits and rolling around in lowriders, and seeing them look at it in a different manner and from a different perspective than us. Whereas we're like, oh, that's just like a Sunday afternoon here, right? And I think that's something that's pretty special too, because we're embedded in it. So it makes it easier. I want to show you some of this real quick too. This is just a slideshow that I prepared, but one thing I want to really emphasize is that, yeah, like this is part of our culture. This is part of who we are. So the thing that's amazing about it, and I think like Levi does a wonderful job of doing this and taking the reins um, from our ancestors of utilizing storytelling as a way to get people to understand and appreciate part of who we are, but then also use it as a method of educating the younger individuals within our community about the importance of this aspect of our culture, right? And so locuras is a wonderful example of that. And that's why I like using it, because it's like a good transition from like um just kind of explaining a broad um uh using a broad explanation of what literary landscapes are for New Mexico, but also going into like that modern example of storytelling, right? That we connect to, right? Why? Because one of the reasons that happens so easily for us, especially here in the Southwest and specifically in Nuevo Mexico, and even in Mexico and other places like that, is it's in our blood, right? Like we're used to having this. This is what makes us. This is the catalyst for us to learn. Like most of us learn through that manner, right? Through storytelling. And I'll explain more as we're going along, but his is wonderful. And I think so many of them, and this is a good example again, is because it's real too, right? It's not just like hearing ghost stories or whatever, right? Which I'll talk about too later on, but it's more than just like hearing that tale, right? It has historical relevance to it too. And I think that's what's so special about these pieces of literary works like we read with Locuras, because it does that. It puts us in a place it gives us the historical aspects of it. It's personal, and on top of everything else, it informs us, right? It lets us know about what this is and how important it is to our culture. And I love this too because we have like I love the visual parts of it too, and that's just like my connection to photography and stuff like that too. But like we see how this and this are still beautiful, right? And we hear about when Levi's talking about his abuela walking with him and telling him there's Levi's car, right? And it was like kind of beat up and stuff, right? But that's part of it. In lowrider culture, that's part of the process. Like you get your car and maybe it's raggedy at first or it's beat up, right? But then the progression of you get taking it from that place to where we have it like something like this is a part of the culture. That's it. That's an example of it, right? And so it's important to stress that part of it because a lot of times we don't understand that. We just see like maybe one car that's like beat up and they're like, oh, why are they cruising that car? Well, they're cruising that car because it's important to them. Okay. And it's the first stage of the process of right, maybe making it better. And this may take years, right? And a lot of times it's a family project too. And so that's another thing that I think is so beautiful about it as well. So when people are cruising that little bit beat up Ronfla, maybe it's primered, it's part of the process. Now, eventually it may take a few years, but they may end up having the sick ass paint job and then they'll throw juice on it or hydraulics, right? And it may take like several years for this to happen. And that's real common in Mexico. So you'll see a lot of like those old cars parked in people's yards and stuff like that because why? It's part of our culture, right? And so locuras um is a good example of explaining that, right? So there's like a picture of a car similar to the one that Levi's talking about in the story. And it's cool because like, yeah, we do see this. Like I remember like my tios always having cars like that in their yard and being like, oh, I'm gonna fix it up. Oh yeah, I'm gonna fix it up. And then like little by little, sometimes they would. Some of my tios, those cars are still there, but it's hey, they're still in the mix, if you will, right? Um, and then the importance of like how the cultural aspects of New Mexico in regard to like even religious practices and things like that as well. And even like important events uh in our year-to-year activities as a culture or group in New Mexico, right? Or a group of people practicing a very similar culture or the same culture, I should say, as Nueva Mexicanos, is that we'll see things like this. We'll see like the Ranflas parked in front of the Santuario, right? In Chimayo. Why? Well, for one thing, it's right next to Española, which is the lowrider capital of the world, right? But there's also this connection to those places, right? To religion, to cultural activities attached to certain days like Easter and things like that, where we see this play a part in it, right? And so this is also an important part. And he kind of talks about a little bit of that in there as well. Um, but yeah, that's what's so beautiful about it. And I think like we tend to like forget that part of it because we are here and we see low riders stuff like that frequently. All right, like in Albuquerque, it's pretty common for us to see a low rider. I know some of y'all are from other places, and maybe that's not the same thing. But this gives you a glimpse into that. This gives you a glimpse into how important this is to us, and it's kind of um coming more to the surface now again, where we're starting to see more people like interested in it. We have a car club at UNM now, Inteligente, and stuff like that that helps to continue to promote and sustain this part of our culture, right? And so instead of it disappearing, we're keeping it again, and it's because the younger people are starting to be into it too, right? And so that's a wonderful thing with anything from like lowrider cars, lowrider bikes, cholo and chola culture, the style of photography, pieces of literary works where people are writing poetry about lowriders and stuff like that too, or songs and music. I mean, there's a number of things that are occurring now in regard to this little piece of New Mexican culture, right? And it's beautiful to see it brought into like literary works. And um it's cool to hear from Levi. And when you talk to him in person, it's even more exciting because you hear it in his voice, right? Like even that part of it, like the way he talks, the way he carries himself, his demeanor, all of it is tied to that. And why? Because that was a big part of his upbringing, right? And so we get to see that there. But in the end, it's kind of perfect because it's kind of a perfect example of storytelling. It's a perfect example of sharing those narratives, right? Which early on, that's what we had. There wasn't so much like we think about like with literary works now where people are writing novels and things like that. It was all stories. And it was a beautiful thing, right? And I think that's what's kind of so um interesting about it is we get to experience it now by like reading literary works that have been embedded some of that stuff in there, right? Okay, I wanted to end on this part too. So for this is from the text. For any lowrider, his car may be an ultimate form of expression and representation of how he views himself and wants to be seen. But the story would be incomplete if one were to showcase the lowrider only through the marvelous and beautiful creation of the customized car. I believe, Magdalena, that the last thing in poetry is the poem, and also I believe that the last thing in lowriding is the lowered ride. So straight up, um, that's the truth. Like it's not just about like the final product, it's about the cultural parts of it. Just like of the poem, right? It's the same thing. Okay. And so think about that as we're progressing through this, and even during the semester as we're going through other forms, because I think that's an important part. Okay, so let's get into the other things. Oh, shoot, I forgot to mention this too. So there's another poem called Wheels by Levi Romero. I'm going to read it to you real quick because this one kind of gives us more of that picture, right? Paints more of that picture for us. And so and he does a wonderful job. Like sometimes when the things he says, like I can totally picture them in my head and have seen some of those same things, right? Or have seen people similar to who he's talking about, right? So here we go. How can I tell you, honey? Oh, baby, you'll never know the ride of the lowered Chevy, slithering through the blue dotted night along Riverside Drive, Española. Poetry rides the wings of a 59 Impala. Yes, it does. And it points chrome antenna towards Burke stations, rocking oldies, Van Morrison, Brown Eyed Girls, Credence, and the bad moon rising over Chimayo. And I guess it also rides on Muddy's Subarus turned into new age radio on the frigid road of Taos on weekend ski trips. Yes, baby, you and I are two kinds of wheels on the same road. Listen, listen to the lonesome humming of the tracks we leave behind. Oh, that dude just has it, man. And so like hearing those poems and reading them is uplifting, and it just sets us in another place. Like I could picture all those things when I'm reading it and stuff like that too. Those of y'all that aren't from here, um there's always kind of interesting stuff in regard to this, and you can watch videos and stuff like that too, that are about lowrider culture in New Mexico. um but I like sharing this story because I had last time I taught the class, I had a exchange student from Germany, and she was just like so interested in lowrider culture after this, that she started like going and doing more research in Española and meeting up with some of the lowrider groups here in Albuquerque and stuff like that to talk about it and this stuff. And then she said this cool story about like in Germany, like her mom told her in Germany they didn't have lowriders, but people had like cars that they thought were cool, and so it was still about cars, right? And she said like on Saturday afternoons that they all the dudes with their cool cars would be out there washing them in the afternoon in front of everybody so everybody can see and stuff like that too. And then they'd go cruise after. And all I could think about was like same thing, but just on a different day, right? Because it's usually it happened on Sunday afternoon here. Um, and now we have it on Saturday too. Um, but that was like a cool connection, right? Like across the world, we're seeing that. And although it might not be lowrider culture, a car is still an important part of it. So it was kind of a cool thing to share. But let's get into connection to our antepasados and the works of ancient Mesoamerica in the Southwest. Um, and so here it's important to kind of stress that idea of storytelling, right? This week you are going to be watching a video from Dan Nanankin, who's a indigenous man from Spokane, Washington, talking about the power of storytelling. Um, and so when you watch that video, think about this stuff too, because one thing that's important about it is that all of us can relate to this in some manner. This is cross-cultural too. So like storytelling and stuff like that just isn't um um confined to this area, right? It's all over. Remember we talked about New Mexico landscapes and beyond, like that's the truth, right? And so we see this all over. For this instant, we're going to kind of focus on Mesoamerica and the Southwest. And so it's important to grasp those things and think about how um, some of the components that are connected to literary works or works of literature or writings are all based on shared knowledge through storytelling and stuff like that too. And so I want to kind of share some of those with you too. So the first thing I want to do is share about Turtle Island, right? So Turtle Island is where we live, right? That's the North American and Central American continent, right? And an aerial photo or drawing, you could see there's the shape of it, and there's the turtle, right? There's his head, there's his little feet, there's his tail, Mexico, right? Um, which is so cool because like you never think about it that way, but that's what it is, right? It's this part of America and Central America. And in the with the indigenous peoples of North America, we see this as a motif. We see this as a story that's shared early on in regard to how this came to be. Like one of the things we'll be talking about too during this time is like creation stories and things like that. Why? Because they're an important part of this experience, right? They're an important part of this section of our even this course, right? To learn about these things, right? Um, and so one thing to understand is like Turtle Island is important because it gives us a story of like how we and how this place formed, right? And so I love sharing this story. I'm going to share it with you guys real quick. I'm going to stop sharing real quick so I can go to the actual story. Um, so here it is here. I'm going to share it with you guys, so you guys can read along. I don't know if it'll work because you guys are um looking at this through video. Okay, so the story of Turtle Island goes like this. In the beginning, the Great Spirit made all things and gave instructions of how all creations could live in harmony. For a long time, the creatures of the earth and the earth itself lived in peace, but eventually many forgot to love and respect and honor all living beings. The Great Spirit was unhappy and so the Creator, sorry, he let loose the waters and a great flood swallowed the land, where with nowhere to rest, the animals could only swim, endlessly swim, and the man God who plays between earth and the world of the Great Spirit took pity on them, and he built a raft of sticks and welcomed them aboard. Here they floated, waited the waters and receded, but the waters did not waiting for the waters to recede, but they did not recede. We have failed the Great Spirit because we have forgotten the instructions, the man God said. The animals understood and were ashamed, so they promised if they survived, they would once again remember to love and honor and respect everyone. The turtle had an idea. He offered his back to serve as the foundation of the new earth. Others could swim to the old world below and carry the mud on of that world and place it on his back. In this way, they could create a new earth. The bear loved the idea, and he said, I'm most powerful, so I should have the honor of carrying the mud to create our new world. He took a deep breath and dived, and propelled by his powerful limbs, he swam deeper and deeper, but no matter how hard he stroked, he could not reach the bottom, and soon he felt the breath leaving his body. He shot to the surface, nearly dead from the effort, and the man god breathed life back into him. The beaver said, "You are not a good swimmer, but I am the best of all, so I shall swim down for the mud." He dived, and as he was going in his as he was gone so long, the others were sure he died. When he did long last surfaced, he had no mud, and he too was nearly dead. And the man god breathed life back into him. Now the wolf decided to try. On earth, I could run faster than the wind without losing my breath. I am the finest runner, so I shall try. He dived and he swam, but he could not get to the bottom. And by the time he reached the surface, he too required the breath of the man god to return to life. The animals started to panic. Who would rescue them? Who was the bravest, strongest, the wisest? They began to bicker when above the din, they heard a little voice. It was the muskrat who spoke. I'll try. He spoke, and the others burst out laughing. You aren't powerful or strong or fast, they said. You could never survive. They laughed and teased the muskrat until at last the man god called for silence. Everyone who thinks you are powerful, but none of you could reach the bottom. Remember, on our new earth, no one is more important than anyone else. We all need each other. Without each other, the circle of life is broken. Perhaps the muskrat is not strong or fast or brave as others, but he wants to try to help us, and we must give him our support. The animals fell silent. Then they began to whisper among themselves. Good luck, they said to the muskrat. We're counting on you. We admire you and love and respect you. The muskrat dived. He swam and swam. He was not strong, but he was but when as he moved through the water, he recalled the others' words and feeling their love, he felt power he had never felt before. Muskrat reached the bottom. There he scooped a paw full of mud and held it close to his chest. Let his strong back legs and tail propel him to the surface, where he placed the mud upon the back of the turtle. The others cheered. It was love and encouragement and trust that powered me, the muskrat said. And he dived again with a thought in mind, and others dived too. They were not puffed up by pride, nor swelled by pompous talk. They were moved by love. Each of them reached the bottom and carried back the mud to the surface, to the turtle's back. Soon they had formed a small island. They worked on their island, grew larger and larger. Then one by one, the animals climbed upon the island and the birds flew overhead. Everyone began to sing their songs and caused the wind to blow north, south, east, and west. They danced, and their joyous dance brought life to trees and flowers and grass. Soon the water that had drowned the earth became the oceans and lakes and rivers. The bear offered to move to the far north and live there so that he could keep the water bound in ice and keep it from flooding the land. The creatures named the island Turtle Island in honor of the turtle's gift. So that's the story of Turtle Island. Pretty cool. I know it has like some like other connection and stuff like that. And like this one was written I can't remember the author's name, but they took it from various examples and added it together. And it was an indigenous author. But pretty cool stuff. So I want to continue to talk about like the power of these oral traditions and stuff like that too. All right. And the elements of it too. So some old knowledge and stuff like that too to share, or quotes or whatever you want to call them. This is from Inscott Nomade. Let us tell the old stories. Let us sing the sacred songs, as this is an important part of oral tradition. And oral tradition is very preeminent in New Mexico culture too. Why? Because, you know, we are on indigenous and sacred lands, like I told you guys before in week one, and we have that embedded within our culture too. And so those old stories end up being a major part of it. Even like Levi's is still an example of some of those old stories, because like why? Because that happened a long time ago, right? I'm not saying Levi's all old, like a old man, but he's, you know, he's not he's an elder now, right? And so like he'd be like, I don't know if he'd be proud or give me crap about telling him that, but even like our abuelos and abuelas, They give that to us, right? They share those stories. And so here he refers to the history and beliefs of Native American culture transmitted through oral tradition, folk tales, myths, and poetry. And so that's where we get it, right? We get it through those things like we were talking about before. So some of the elements of oral tradition continued as spoken word, so storytelling and performances, and these were like the first examples of it, right? So this is when we first started seeing these things occur, and this is when we first started experiencing this, and this is a long time ago, and I'll kind of dive into it more in a second. But the major types are like creation myths, like we just heard, tales of heroes and tricksters. Tricksters were like people that did bad stuff or tricked people and stuff like that, and then ritual songs, chants, and poems. Um, but a major emphasis relies upon living in harmony with the natural world. And even our more modern ones too are similar to that. Like I'll talk about too when we talk about like folklore and stuff like that later on in the semester, where we see like it's a lesson to be learned, right? By hearing these stories, right? Um, but let's talk about like how this probably went down. Oops, sorry. Oh, I can go here real quick too. So myths and origin. The myth is a story that explains a natural phenomenon, human behavior, or a mystery of the universe. And so that's probably one of the things that we most connect to in regard to like these old ancient pieces of works, right? So creation myths tell us how the world and humans came to exist. Origin myths explain how natural phenomena such as the stars, moon, mountains came to be, or why society has certain beliefs and customs. But let's talk a little bit there. Okay, so I want to stop here. So there's some pictures here of like creation myths and things like that as well. There's Turtle Island. So this is kind of wild because like a lot of times we don't understand how this like went down, but it did. And so early on, and there's been research with this with anthropologists and archaeologists in regard to like how they believe people interacted socially. And this is like during the hunter-gatherer periods and even before that with like cave people, right? And so like when things went down back then, it wasn't like how we think now. Like it wasn't like a Zoom video, obviously, or like even television, right? Um, but it was similar in some ways, right? And so that idea of sharing knowledge was the entertainment. It was um the poetry that we needed here, those kind of things, the books, the novels, the television shows, the radio, right? All of it was through the oral traditions of storytelling, right? And so creation stories and origin myths and all those things are creation origin information or stories are also tied to that too. So this is how I imagine it going down, right? So like hunter gatherers, cave people, if you will, just as a group took out a giant sloth, right? Or like a big old giant buffalo or something, right? They got it, butchered it, ate, right? Everybody's has a full belly. They're standing around the bonfire, right? Trying to keep warm, maybe. And one of the elders gets up and starts talking. And they start telling a story, right? They start telling these stories as a way to give people like knowledge that they need to survive. Probably at first, like, remember whenever Trug, the caveman or whatever, ate this berry, the forbidden berries, right? And this is what happened to him. And then so now everybody's like, nah, I'm not gonna go by those forbidden berries because Trug died, right? It's a story that has emphasis on survival, right? And so early on, it was kind of like that, but then it was also people started to wonder about the the stuff around him, the living things around him, everything around him. Like, where did it come from? And so they came up with these stories. Why are we here? Like, that's a question that we still ask ourselves. Like, why am I here? Right? And so they deal with the same questions. They dealt with the same questions we have even now, right? And so that's one thing that's beautiful too, is when you relate to it in that manner. So what they did is they started to come up with these stories, right? To share uh where this comes from. And I remember like one of my favorite ones, like growing up, that I heard was the tale of the owl, um, and how the owl came to be. So I'll tell you real quick. So the Great Spirit was like helping to form all the animals, right? Or not helping, was forming all the animals, right? And the Great Spirit was working on the rabbit. And so the Great Spirit had the rabbit by its ears, right? And was trying to shape it and stuff like that. While it was doing that, the owl was bothering was bothering the Great Spirit and was like, hey, what about me? Am I next? Yes, yeah, we'll work on you in a little bit, right? And the owl was like impatient. And the owl had all these ideas of what the owl wanted to look like, right? I want to have the owl wanted to have like these really big, beautiful wheeling wings, a beautiful set of feathers, all this stuff, right? And the owl kept bugging the Great Spirit while the Great Spirit was working. So finally, the Great Spirit got frustrated and turned around and went, "Stop!" And Great Spirit had the rabbit by its ears in his hand, and when the Great Spirit went like that, the ears elongated, right? And so the rabbit's ears got long, and then the rabbit freaked out and took off before the Great Spirit could finish the rabbit. And so that's why the rabbit has big legs and a smaller body because it wasn't finished, right? And its long ears were because it went like that and his ears got long, right? Took off. Well, then the Great Spirit was like, okay, now you're next. And they grabbed the owl, put it in front of him, and bops him on the head, boom, and pushes the owl's neck into his shoulders. My family and I says, like, what neck? Because I don't have a neck, right? But I'm like an owl, right? No neck. Pushes it into the shoulders. So his head and his shoulders are real close to each other. And his eyes popped out too when that happened. And then the Great Spirit ran the owl off, and the owl takes off scared. And because the Great Spirit comes out during the day, the owl stays in during the day and only comes out at night, right? And I mean, that's a short version of the story, but I remember hearing that and I just was like, my mind was blown when I was a kid, like hearing those stories, right? And that's something you guys are going to do this week as well is you're going to listen, read, watch some of these stories. And we call it a tutu. And a tutu is like where you get little kids together and you tell them these stories, and sometimes it's about animals, like where they came to be. It's also about survival and safety, like to keep them away from doing certain things. And it's a time when we share our knowledge with the children of our group, right? And these tutu stories end up being something that children learn from, right? And so you guys are gonna have like a tutu story assignment where you guys are gonna read, listen, and watch some of these stories. And then you're gonna pick one, and I'll explain it later. And I'll show you too where you guys kind of focus on doing an analysis of. But it's good to be able to watch and hear some of these creation myths and things like that, creation stories. So I shouldn't say myths, creation stories that uh share this knowledge, right? So kind of cool stuff, and I'll dig into that a little bit more in a minute. But indigenous knowledge, continue to cherish youth but trust old age. And that's an old Pueblo piece of knowledge, right? um which is kind of true. Cherish youth but trust old age, and like firm believer in that. And then a Hopi piece of knowledge is the one who tells the stories rules the world. And like we see that very fairly often in history, right? Where we hear history being taught from a certain perspective and we lose out on some of it based off of that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this dude. And so this is Nezahualcoyot, and he was a very interesting individual to say the least. He was ended up being a king or like a ruler in Mesoamerica or Central America in the Mexica Empire. Um and he ended up being he was also an architect too, um and a sorry, he was an architect and all this other crazy stuff. He's just a really smart scholar, philosopher, person. He was a warrior, too, in Texcoco, Mexico too. I forgot to mention that too. But what he ended up doing and being most well known for was for his poetry. And so Nezahualcóyotl was an interesting guy. And so he ended up ruling and stuff like that too. But he was originally known for his he was a royal too, so I forgot to mention that's obvious too, I think in some manners. But he was also known for being um an architect. So he was the one that designed some of the pyramids and things like that as well. But he was also a pretty interesting guy. Uh he was one of the ones, he's probably the most famous poet of the Aztec world, I would say, because he ended up uh being the one that we had the most works for, and a lot of it was based on the fact that, like, when contact happened or when colonization hit um Central America, his works were seen as being good enough to keep, I guess you could say. And that sounds bad to say that, but like, because they destroyed so many things from the Aztec, Mexica, and Mayan people, and Incas, and everybody else. Um, but his was some of the works that ended up staying. And he was also there, like in the middle of the beginning parts of stages of colonization. He was born in 1402, and he became the ruler of Texcoco in 1429, and he ruled there for like around 40 years or something like that. And so during that time, he would do all this wild stuff and do all these innovations too. But he also was known for his poetry. And so, and the thing that I love about him is that he was like open to talking about his feelings, I guess you would say, more than like we would see, like, because you could see like we have other pieces of poetry from them and stuff like that. But and song too, that was the other thing too. um but a lot of times it was like directly connected to like the gods or the spirits, right? Or it was about like a ruler or something like that, but never really too much about like personal feelings and stuff like that. He was all about that. That's a drawing of him. But this is one of his ones, and I shared this too on the module. And he says, I Nezahualcóyotl. And you have to remember, like, I forgot to mention about Nawat. It's not Nawaddle, it's Nawat. And so that TL, it's like that. So his name is Nezahualcóyotl, right? And that means hungry coyote. Okay. Like coyote or coyote is a Nahuatl word. It's coyote, right? And so he says, I Nezahualcóyotl ask this: is it true no one really lives on earth? Not forever on earth, only a little while here. Though it be jade, it falls apart. Though it be gold, it wears away. Though it be quetzal plumage, it's torn asunder. Not forever on this earth, only a little while here. And for me, that's like pretty deep, because I've felt that before too. It's just like what the heck? Like, what is this thing, that this life we experience, right? And he brings us apart, and he talks about um how do you say it? The uh how we are basically like so fragile too, right? Like jade, it falls apart, and that's a stone, right? Gold, which is a metal, wears away. How deep is that? And so learning this and hearing about this kind of stuff from people like Nezahualcóyotl um ends up being very uplifting to me as not only a person, a poet, a writer, a folklorist, or whatever, right? But just like me, like, now I can see how I can relate to someone that lived so far back in the past. 1402, right? That's like a long ass time ago. And same kind of thought, which is pretty cool. This is another one. I comprehend the secret hidden. Oh, my lords, thus we are immortal. We are humans through and through. We all will have to go away. We all have to die on earth. Like a painting, we will be erased. Like a flower, will end up, will dry up. Here on earth, like plumed vestments of precious bird, that precious bird with the agile neck, we will come to an end. Think on this, O lords, eagles and tigers, though you be jade, though you be gold, and also will be there to the place of the fleshless. We will have to disappear. No one can remain. So this is the continuation of that same poem, right? Same stuff, man. He just drops some like really deep stuff, right? And it's pretty wild. And you have to remember this is a translation. So of course it's translated and they couldn't find words for like that met or were able to be translated correctly. So they added words they thought it was like. And so this is what we came up with. And but just really cool, like to think about all this stuff, right? And how deep this was. And he wrote like some love songs, love poems and stuff like that too. A lot of his stuff was kind of like more on the sad side or somber side of stuff. So that's why people related to him and like really felt his stuff so much. And this is from a ruler, right? So this is somebody that was supposed to be an elite, right? And he still has the same feelings as many other people. Um, I am intoxicated, I weep, I grieve, I think, I speak. Within myself, I discover this. Indeed, I shall never die. Indeed, I shall never disappear. There where there is no death, there where death is overcome, let me go there. Indeed, I shall never disappear. Just so cool, man. Like, who thought like this dude from Mesoamerica or Central America in the 1400s would be able to drop such great insight and knowledge? And I shouldn't say it like that, I guess you'd say, because like it's like I don't think that people couldn't do it. It's just like how we can relate to it more than anything. Like this is stuff that we still think about today. And so that's what's so beautiful about it to me. Um I love Nezahualcoyot because he does some really cool stuff. Um okay, stop there. I wanted to go ahead and show you guys the stuff that you're going to be working on this week. Um because we uh we have a couple of different things to share. Um, and so one of them is going to be, let me get this up real quick. Uh, sorry. Um, where are you? Here we go. Okay. So back to this place here. So the modules, here's the module for week 2. There's the videos and stuff there. There's that power sharing history. It'll be posted in the announcement to and solo this video. There's the thoughts of Neza Wakayo, and there's the song of flight by Neza Wakayo. Then there's the tutu stories. That's the one that you're going to be working on. So where it says there are tutu stories, all of them there are those stories. You'll work on that. I'm going to click on the assignments here. Here they are, tutu response. Um, so you're going to click on that. And what you need to do is you need to read through those stories or listen to them or watch them. And then you're going to pick one story that you really connected to or related to or one that resonated with you. And then what you're going to do is you're going to do an analysis of that. 1 page for undergrad, 2 pages for graduate students, please. So how you under say how this analysis and elements, the effectiveness of this example of oral tradition. And remember that you need to discuss why you connected to this story and how you think these types of stories contribute to culture and literary culture as well. So you're gonna do that in a page and 2 pages if you're a grad student. Trying to keep it simple, it's not too difficult, but gives you a good example to kind of dive into something a little bit more. Then we're gonna go back. You have another video discussion there. And so that one's the ancient thought and power of storytelling. And so you're going to share an example of like ancient thought, or that doesn't mean it has to be like from like way back there, but even like from your familia, from your grandparents or whatever, or the power of storytelling that you experienced where someone told you a story that really affected you and got you to change the way you think or even like be cognizant of things that maybe you weren't before, right? And it could be simple. Like I remember witnessing it, not having to hear the story, but my sister snuck out one time and my mom busted her but didn't tell her. And then so the next night my sister tried to sneak out and my mom waited for her to be climbing out the window. And then my mom went over there and pushed her out of the window. While she was sneaking out, there was a rose bush on the other side. So my sister landed in the rose bush. And I knew after that not to sneak out, right? And so now I tell that story to like my students or even my children in the hope of them like that say figuring out like don't sneak out. All right. So even simple things like that you can share. All right. It is a video discussion, so you'll record a video. You can record. I forgot to mention this last time. You can record using Cultura Media, or you can also just record it yourselves and then upload it. That's fine. However you want to do it, whatever is easiest for you. But then you also have to respond to a couple of your classmates too through video. All right. So that's what's going on down this week. Hopefully, all is well, and you guys are moving along nicely in your studies. And hopefully you're enjoying the class so far. Enjoy the readings and videos this week, and I look forward to reading and listening to some of your video responses. Bueno, bye. Have a nice week.